Thank you very much for the introduction. I have the honor of going last on the second day, so I'm pretty excited. Spent a lot of time in the audience just reflecting on the conversations, and I really wanted to start real quickly with just a big thank you to the UX Poland team. As a member and founder of UX for Good, they were kind enough to invite us here as a partner to speak and kind of integrate into the great conversation around responsibility and design. And so we were really excited when they asked us to do that. And then obviously when we heard about Amnesty International as the other partner, we kind of changed our plans and course and really said, you know what, let's actually do some design doing and put some designers to work like we do when we have UX for Good challenges and other workshops and see what we could do with them. So I wanted to thank the Amnesty team, Drainia and her team, that also included an activist. And on Monday, we took about 20 designers through a workshop that included kind of some really quick research and interviewing, empathy mapping, and customer journey mapping, really all about helping to kind of redesign the refugee inside the refugee crisis. How could we come up with ways for increasing activist engagement? So here's just a couple photos from that. I was really impressed with the team. I'll have to say that there were three groups we divided into. One spoke entirely Polish, so that was a little challenging for me to follow along, but it was also really great to just be kind of inserted into the group and the culture and the design community here within Poland. So that was really exciting. If you see yourselves up there, give yourself a round of applause, because I think Amnesty was really excited about some of the ideas. Having conversation with them after the workshop, they were pretty excited to look at how they could carry some of this thinking forward. With that said, I thought I'd jump into the talk today. It's called An Undesigned World. I wanted to reflect on the questions that we're asking ourselves as designers here at the conference, the big theme, responsibility of design. And I also wanted to do that with the understanding of kind of what's happening in our field and the impact that, as design has evolved, has had on business, on organizations, on problems, big and small, and the value that we're bringing to the table as we work within digital products and services, or even beyond that. And this is kind of a little bit of a timeline I'd just like to kind of reference as we think about where we've come from in literally just the last 20 plus years, all the way from, we were just building a simple website, maybe as a replacement for Yellow Pages or as a business card, so to speak, all the way through to digital corporate strategy and organizational transformation and customer experience, and now it becoming kind of systemic within organizations, not just corporate, but actual NGOs at times, or nonprofits. And I'm going to share a little bit about that and the work that we're doing with one of them in particular. And what we're seeing as designers inside of our profession is major investments, whether that be organizations buying talent, investing in design talent and design thinking, developing it organically and training their workforce, their employees, the people out in the field, establishing partnerships across a variety of different types of disciplines to bring that thinking to bear on their challenges, as well as helping create kind of this design-centric culture to re-examine, to rethink their problems that they've got in new and different ways and really put a dent in them. I think you've seen some of the speakers in the last couple of days actually talk a little bit about some of that work that's happening in kind of in design and social impact, and that's really exciting to see. And all of this is really fueling a big excitement for us. And I realized I put up the fuel band. I should have probably put up Whoop instead as an older example. But the range of things that we're doing is like everything's being designed today, whether that's physical architecture in a grocery store all the way through to some digital app or sitting in your car, as in the case of the last presentation with Tesla as a concept. And so these things are all around us. Even I'll put a shout out to my youngest son over here, who's experiencing technology in ways that, can you imagine if you were 2.5 years old and experiencing virtual reality? That's kind of crazy, the world we live in today. I think when I was 2, the internet wasn't, well, it existed, but it was well before dial-up on AOL and Prodigy. So having kind of seen these things happening, I think it's really, really exciting for us. And at times, I think it's actually sometimes overwhelming because everything seems to be designed, I think. And we feel it when it's not designed. I think that's kind of an interesting. I'm really curious about examining that because there are so many problems that we can choose to work on within our companies, our organizations, or in our passions. And I think that's a really interesting thing to see, is how integral our thinking and the work that we do is inside of solving problems and challenges. So a quote from Bruce Mao, who's a really wonderfully talented designer, has done a lot of great things in his career. Now that we can do anything, what will we do next? And I think that's kind of one of those questions we're here talking about and asking ourselves. How are we responsible for what we're doing? Ethically, morally, whether that's a designer oath, like the Hippocratic Oath, or what is it that we're doing and why? And I think I started to think about this question as I was going into the conference, and ultimately to me is about what about all these other experiences that remain undesigned? Those things that we see, feel, or that we know are huge problems in the world or in local, hyper-locally even in communities. And how far can we push the edge of design to help some of these social challenges? And ultimately, what's our responsibility as designers when we help tackle and look at some of those challenges? And so that gets me to a little bit of a story I wanted to share about designing for the undesigned and our work with the Kigali Genocide Memorial. I'm not sure if everyone knows the history of events that happened in Rwanda in 1994, but between April 7th to mid-July, about a 100-day period, the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda took place. And it killed almost 1 million people. 1 million people over 100 days, we'll do some quick designer math, although I know the answer, is approximately 1 person every 7 seconds. So can you imagine that for a moment? That's devastating. And these people weren't just kind of killed. They were like slaughtered, murdered. These were friends and family members. These were sister-in-laws, brother-in-laws, neighbors. Amazing. And as we started to talk with the organization that helped set up the Kigali Genocide Memorial in 2004, Aegis Trust, their mission really is about preventing crimes against humanity. So they get involved in a lot of different tension areas, conflict areas, or even prior to them becoming a conflict area around the world. And the question they really asked us was, we don't want to produce more genocide memorials. We've got, about 80,000 people who come and visit every year. It's a place of remembrance and reflection for folks that have lost their loved ones. Approximately 250,000 people are buried in mass graves there. And so the question really became, how do we turn these institutions, and the question for us, how do we turn these institutions that memorialize genocide into institutions that help end it? How do we have less genocide in the world? Not hundreds and hundreds of more memorials necessarily just for the purpose of educating, but turning these institutions into more of an agent of social change. And so we took a team to Kigali, Rwanda. It's kind of what we do, what UX for Good is kind of centered around, or was built around in terms of this annual challenge. And we handpicked some of the best and brightest designers from around the world, and we embark upon a challenge. It's usually a few months in the planning, where we're doing a lot of research and discovery with the organization so we can have kind of a dossier and a brief for the team hitting the ground. And then we let them go. We have a bit of a process, but this is full-on immersive. This isn't like asking your client, can we go talk to someone? This isn't like trying to get ahead of the curve and seeing how we might be able to ask some more questions from visitors. This is carte blanche access and very immersive type of research leading through synthesis, ideation, and design. And as you visit the memorial, and I'll share a little bit about what this experience is like because it's important to understand, you kind of park your car, you get out, you walk down, you're greeted by a guide, by the way, who happens most of the time to be a genocide survivor themselves. So the folks working at the memorial aren't individuals who are just helping run and curate a museum. Their loved ones are also buried in these mass graves as well. So it's a highly personal experience. You actually don't know that, though, until somewhere down the end of the journey where you realize that some of the people that you're seeing in the video inside the museum providing testimony in the recount of their story of how their loved ones were killed right in front of their faces are actually giving the tour. That is a chilling and awakening experience to make the connection. And as you move through the outside of the grounds, you see these mass graves. Obviously, loved ones who are still with us are paying their respects to those who are buried there. You make your way inside the memorial. You see some history and build-up and timeline of the experience. And then you start to see what genocide really looks like. The weapons, the photographs. You see photographs of that have been put there. These are actual ID cards of Hutu and of Tutsi individuals that were killed. You move through and you see clothing, and you start to kind of really feel this. It's a very strong, palpable, emotional reaction you're starting to have because you can actually envision your friends, neighbors, loved ones with some of the same or similar clothing when you see an Adidas sweatshirt or sweatpants or something like that. There's also some other rooms that show bones and skulls, and those are for the pure purpose of showing how these individuals were were killed, and the devastation that it creates on, or I should say, how frail the human body is when it gets clubbed over the head with a machete. And then you move out of that room immediately, and you're kind of you see this kind of peace and artful reflection. And what you think is the ending of the museum continues upstairs. And as you go upstairs, you walk up the stairs, you can turn to the left, and you walk in the children's room. Now, mind you, there are some other rooms in this upper or second floor that tell you about other mass atrocities around the world, but there's no guidance. There's no signage. You don't really know, should I go left, right? You're hearing sounds from the bathroom, from hand dryers and toilets and stuff because the door's hinge doesn't really work well. So there's a lot of distractions, and so it's kind of a confusing emotional experience. And so these photos are representatives of children, and they were actually in addition to the memorial because someone had left them at the gate. And so the memorial being run by survivors and other folks helping kind of move the community forward had to do something with this. So they just put it inside of a room in terms of a display. And so they created this children's room, and ultimately there's some really beautiful pictures of some of these children smiling, happy, and there's a bit of a plaque that's below it. And you move up to the plaque and you start to read down, favorite food, their name, their favorite food, their favorite toy, what they like to play, etc., and then how they were murdered. And you're just hit. Like somebody punched the wind out of you, knocked the wind out of you. And then you turn around and you're greeted by some sort of semblance of feedback. After just being punched in the gut, crying my eyes out because as a parent I'm reflecting on if those were my children. I still to this day, as I return, I have a really hard time going into this room. And you're met with something that looks like this. And it's not horrible, until you see what it's asking you to do. And so it's there to provide feedback on terms of comments about your experience and your visit, because ultimately what they're really interested in is you sharing your experience, your feelings, your reaction, because it's a way of kind of converting this emotion, as they think about it in this form, to kind of never forgetting and remembering. Unfortunately, though, that this doesn't really work, because the way they've set this up is it's like providing feedback via text messaging on a tablet, that somebody else's tablet, and so there's no kind of collecting of information, there's no indexing it, there's no way to use it again, really, and it's just this broken experience. And you're so emotionally kind of charged at this point, and you also have to understand, and this is important, is they actually don't have at this point, when we were engaged with them, they have no website and no way to collect information about visitors that have been coming for, at that point, 10 plus years. And so visitors wanted to engage, but as they moved out, they were either greeted by something like this, like, come through our gift shop and buy a book on more history of the genocide, or what's the progress post-genocide, or buy any number of things that were really just insignificant. Or they were greeted by an individual when we were there, a young college kid, trying to make a difference. And that's really wonderful that he wanted to become actively involved. The problem is that you're exiting the museum and you cannot respond. You're burnt out. You're done. And then being asked to be able to give some feedback so they could post it via social media. And you can't even really act. It's just like, I don't even know what to do at that point. So you go sit down on the bench in the really hot sun that lacks shade from some of the trees, and you're just unable to react. And that was our experience first time we were there. And as we moved through that experience with them over the course of a week and prior to, we conducted about 500 plus hours of various forms of research, including visiting other sites and talking with other folks that were helping kind of institute peace-building education, delivering that, or running other museums and memorials that are kind of on the outreach of the city of Kigali. And as we did that, and as we took that data back, and we really started to kind of think through and synthesize that, we found that the journey went like this. Pain, 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 action. There wasn't a connecting thing to this, and it was so painful that you're not going to get anybody to really react. And as we started to reflect on that experience, from our observations, from our research, we started to find some other interesting secondary research as well at our disposal. In particular, there's some research done by Tanya Singer, who's a German neuroscientist. And she did some research on the distinction between empathy and compassionate action. And the experience that we had and the research that we conducted, conjoined with some of this secondary research's validation, really helped to kind of illustrate what we were feeling. And that was one of so much empathy was leading to either ourselves or the visitors or others that we were observing burning out or shutting down and unable to act. And that's a really big problem for the memorial, because ultimately, as a nonprofit organization, they're interested in furthering their mission, obviously, but helping kind of turn visitors into advocates, as well as helping extend it. So engagement is really what that is all about for them. And so as we started to look through the research and try to make sense of it, we found the new journey for us as a prototype, as a hypothesis for us, kind of went like this instead. Pain, reflection, hope, and action. And ultimately, by looking at it in that way, allows us to be able to get to a better balance of this distinction between emotion and compassion, and so that you're more mindful of the visitor journey that someone has through it. And that led us to something called the Enzo curve. And the Enzo curve you can think about this as an emotional conversion model that allows us, kind of like a journey map or some service blueprint, or if you're familiar with those terms, and allows us to really look at the emotional experience that someone has as they move through. And it looks a little like this. It's called the Enzo curve, by the way. I didn't put this in a slide. because Nzovu, in the language of Kinyarwanda, means elephant. And so what we found is, as we were actually mapping this out, we actually had somebody who loves spirit animals on our team as we brought, and it's actually shaped like an elephant's trunk. And so that resonated really well with our Rwandan friends because they had an easy way to kind of help describe this. Again, going back to some of the talks in the last couple of days, when you do some of this work, I think Franco was mentioning some of this, is, there's a cultural context. You need to build cultural advocacy when you do these sorts of things. So models and frameworks and getting people involved in understanding the process is really pretty key in advancing the work. And so we reported out all this great knowledge and insight, and what we found is that we hit a nerve. But we knew we only had a kind of a hypothesis at this point, the beginnings of a model. And after we did that, everything kind of paused. And that's because we hit this nerve that caused a great deal of reflection for an organization that didn't quite expect that. They expected something to happen, sure, but didn't really quite exactly know what. And so, one of the lessons for us as we do this work is organizational change can be really slow. Now, that could be in the corporate world, but it certainly is sometimes also in a nonprofit or an NGO world as well. And so while we were waiting for them to kind of figure out how to shift and get aligned in terms of their organization to help kind of continue to partner and move this thinking forward, we said, you know what, we need to learn more about this model, this hypothesis that we have. And so we went out and did some virtual events. We actually had a day that we built a toolkit, and we took about 75 designers around the world in one day and mapped 6 different memorials and museums because we wanted to learn more. And then we were invited to Geneva Museum, to a Museum Next conference. I didn't even know that something like that existed. And we did a workshop with about 50 folks from museums and memorials from around the world to help continue to understand, is this framework helpful for understanding and mapping the interactions and experiences that people have at these institutions? And it turns out, yes, there's more work to be done, but at least we were kind of on our way. And then in process, Kigali got back to us, and they were actually ready. And it turned out that while we were kind of waiting for them, they had already started making changes based upon our recommendations. And so one of the things that they did was they went and built a brand new reception center to welcome visitors rather than into an empty plaza. They actually brought them into a brand new reception center, allowed them to watch a video that was created and shared in the stories of 3 survivors about what this place means to them. And that was really critical. Because that meshed with the Nzovu curve and getting people started on their way. The other thing that they did was, I mentioned the videos already. The other thing that they did was, based from our research, what we were seeing in the field when we went out and visited these education programs, they were delivering peace-building education curriculum in local communities as kind of like a variety of different field trips for educators. Because they hadn't been adopted by the national curriculum. It's now, this year is the first time they've actually put this peace-building education into the curriculum, which is a huge move for them. And so what was missing was elements from this peace-building education in the actual memorial itself. And so what we had recommended to them was start to think about incorporating this so people can understand, you can move out the up and out part of the curve to understand these stories of progress that was being made by genocide survivors and the youth of Rwanda. 40% of Rwanda is under the age of 15. Can you imagine that? That's like wiping out, in America, that's probably like wiping out the baby boomer class. That's ridiculous. And so as we started to re-engage with them, our next challenge was really, they had asked us to come back and start to really get down to the next level and thinking about the entire experience for visitors as well as strengthening it for survivors. And that's when we started to learn about this really interesting inflection point that their organization was at. And ultimately that inflection point is one of the following. It's one of the core focus and mission of the memorial is really all about remembrance and reflection for survivors. Remember, there's more than 250,000 people that are buried there in some sort of fashion or another. And also, 80,000 plus people visit there internationally from all over the world. The problem is that they needed to continue to develop both of those experiences. And while they had made progress on some of the visitor elements, they didn't have a website. They had no way to collect data about who was visiting, no like booking forms, because when you visit, it's free. By the way, the two tourism, I guess, main draws for tourism in Rwanda are the director of tourism he says are the two G's. People come for the gorillas, and they come to see genocide. That's unfortunate, because this story is about rebirth and a celebration of humanity and positive values and the progress of Rwanda. So there's obviously some more work we've got to do there. But so strengthening, looking at these two big questions, when we went back and had workshops with genocide survivors, KGM staff, and government leaders and officials, again, this is important to get the buy-in and advocacy and the thinking. So as designers, we have to be facilitators. I'm not an expert in Rwandan culture. I certainly can't speak 3 of the languages that were spoken in these workshops. 4 languages in total: English, Kinyarwanda, French, and Italian. Never done that before, but that was pretty impressive to see just happen. And so the ideas that came out of those design workshops were really interesting and really pushed my view as a designer, as a UX designer, into spaces that I had never really been in, which is really exciting for me. And one of the big things that we heard clearly in validation was that for survivors, KGM is home. And that was really, really, really important, because hearing the survivors say that again for the second time was important. And in association with them, we actually developed across all these groups some pretty critical, well, you could call them brand principles, if you will. I'll call them experience design principles for the Kigali Genocide Memorial. That was lacking, but by doing that together, allowed us to help make decisions more swiftly down the road. And one of the things that survivors told us was that they really needed a place to reflect. As I mentioned, we were at this inflection point with the memorial, and so survivors aren't going to want to enter a visitor's entrance with the visitors. This is like going to a cemetery, a memorial. And so what we did is I brought an architect with me when we went out there. And one of the things that we did was we concepted this notion of a survivor pavilion and reflection garden, because what we heard really was we needed a quiet space to write and reflect messages. And so as a designer, that's awesome. I love architecture. I'm experience focused. But when we did that, we had a concept sketch, and then in December, the UN had declared December 8th, I believe it was, International Genocide Remembrance and a kind of commemoration. And so, as for a big meeting, we actually pulled a team together to build a 3D model of the space so that they could share. And we built that into Google Cardboard as a VR. Primarily because what we wanted to do was advance the conversation. And what a better way to do that if you could get a bit more experiential than somebody providing a PowerPoint presentation or a keynote or a printout or a model. And we could use technology like virtual reality in ways to advance the discussion and reflection of what the experience should be. This is the part of experimentation that we get really excited about, because it unlocks additional insight that maybe hadn't previously been able to. And as we've continued over the last handful of months, they finally have launched a brand new website, which is great. They finally have kind of a bit of a technology framework underpinning that to be able to take booking and information from visitors that are coming, so that we know more about these individuals, because what we want to do is provide the tour guides with more insight about who's visiting and why. They know generally who's visiting and where they're coming from. The problem is they don't understand the mindset and the attitudes and the motivations and the understandings for why and what they're curious about. And so we think, our hypothesis is, as we start to collect some of this information and think about almost data science to a degree, that we could provide some more information that in turn can help develop a richer conversation with visitors while they're there in exploring other ways of engagement. This is not about just somebody giving $25 a month or whatever. This is about advancing a mission, about celebrating positive humanitarian values, sustainable peace education, and being able to advocate for that. And so that's where we're at with the Kigali Genocide Memorial right now, is helping them kind of just push some of these basic underpinnings around some of the strategic kind of experience framework that we've created, and then trying to do some experiments with them along the way so that they not only understand or develop a better way of thinking about using design to help look at some of these challenges, but also from the standpoint of quick and easy, maybe inexpensive, right, test and learning kinds of styles of things, which is really critical because they're a nonprofit organization with limited international funds at times. And that's pretty important to remember as a designer, is the constraints that you have to deal with. Okay, so that's the story of Kigali Genocide Memorial. I wanted to quickly just share some insights from the work we did with KGM, but also from a few other challenges that we've done with the Grammys and Music Cares around challenges in the music community in New Orleans, and then also working with the Dalai Lama Center in Vancouver around advancing social and emotional learning in the classroom. And so I have kind of 5 insights that as I was thinking about what could I provide here as designers, looking to get into more social impact type projects, doing some of this work, being more responsible in design, and then also things that I'm still working through too, to be honest. This is a new space for me. So, working with nonprofits and NGOs and more mission-driven corporate social responsibility I've worked in that space for a little bit, but it has not been the full-time thing. That's where I'm really kind of concentrating on now as a designer. And so these are five things that I wanted to leave you with in thought. The first one is check for ready position. And ultimately what this means is, as a designer or a team that goes in to help look at a particular problem with an organization, you have to start to really understand where are they at in terms of their ability to understand, integrate, and sustain the design ideas. Your work is only as good as it can be sustained after your involvement. You might have one opportunity to work with that organization. You need to make sure that it could be carried forward and understood in the way it should be looked at or evaluated or refined. And if you don't do that, you can actually stall out or halt progress. We've actually learned that from some of the work that we've done because we were ourselves still in an experimental stage in terms of looking at how could we push design thinking into problem spaces and help generate ideas, but not always having the knowledge or capability to be able to move those things forward, and those organizations not knowing how to do it either. So that's a pretty key learning. Second is build bridges. I think we heard that through some of the talks today and yesterday, and this is really all about, as a designer, as a humanitarian, just taking responsibility to build this language gap between the organization, I think Franco said, being able to speak NGO. I thought that was a great slide. I think you should develop, maybe there's a wiki or a wiki page associated with all those terms and definitions, because that's fabulous, by the way. And I think that ultimately is the same on the counterpoint of that is for designers to be able to bridge that gap and translate that to what the organization understands. And we still do that with the Kigali Genocide Memorial today. And we're actually helping teach them how to do it. So that's giving them some basic tools, some basic techniques is really important as well, on top of just being able to translate it. Number 3 is be able to look both ways. Ideas for solving or helping to look at some of these problems can come from within the same problem, social challenge space, or it could also come out from outside of it. The thing about innovation, when we think about disruption and innovation and transformation, is innovation really isn't always something new to the world. It just has to be new to how you're applying it at times. Here's an example. After Wyatt's talk yesterday, I sat there in the audience and just thought about, wow, this distinction between a typical museum or memorial and what we want to do with the Kigali Genocide Memorial is really similar. in vain to the description of the Applebee's, or the Snapplebee's, I think it was, and the 3-star Wexford Michelin restaurant, in which you take time and energy to observe everything, and you soak that in, and you take that to the point of improving the relationship with the individuals that come as your guests, as your visitors. And ultimately, that's what we want to do with the Kigali Genocide Memorial, is to provide them with ways to further engage past giving money, but becoming advocates, by becoming other peace builders around the world. Fourth, layer the experience. I think of experience as 3 layers. The first layer being really all about the work we're doing to advance the thinking around solving a problem, creating a product or a service. And that's really important. We have to be really great at that. And we have to think about what are the tools we're going to use, and the techniques and the methods and the skills that we have to bring to bear for that. And that's critical. The middle layer is probably the most pivotal layer, I think, as we work on projects, regardless NGO or for-profit or startup. And that's the one of the stakeholder or the client or the stakeholder. Why is that important? Well, it's important because you need to get them to participate in the process. It goes back to some of the translation of NGO speak or business speak into design and back and forth. It also goes to building advocacy for the way you think and act, for the way all of us think and act in solving problems. In addition, if you want your thinking and the ideas that you're putting forth to be sustained after you're done working, after that project, you've got to start to look at how do you build up some of that capacity within the organization to do it. It's really expensive to continue to hire people. Those big companies that I put up on the screen earlier can certainly do that with the billions and billions of dollars that they have at their disposal. But an organization that costs about $400,000 a year to run and is reliant on international aid and funding over multi-year grants can't afford that unless they find a major donor to do it, or you're doing it for free. The third layer, I think, to me, is really important, and that's because it deals with our team and us as designers. We bring a lot of passion and energy to the work that we do, no doubt. But what's really important is about the engagement, and you have to be mindful of the experience for the team and that they're having with you on that project, with the client. I think all 3 layers of this experience has to exist to have a successful project. If not, it teeters over, or you increase the risk of it not working, not being able to be sustained, or your idea not surviving past the work that you're doing. Lastly, be human-centered. There are no shortage of methodologies, processes, and toolkits. And there's a ton of really great ones. You've seen some of those over the last couple of days, from how to conduct research, or it's a collective action toolkit, or whatever it might be. But most importantly, this is not a hackathon. This isn't you're showing up for a service design jam. This is something you got to fall in love with the problem because you need to ignite your passion, and this is very personal. These problems that we get into in terms of responsibility design, yes, there's digital responsibility, yes, there's do no harm, and yes, we want to avoid dark patterns, but when you get inside of the social impact sort of space and you're not taking this very personal, that really can be a problem. Technology evolves fast. You need to make sure you put people first, and you need to make sure you professionally and ethically care. And here's why. This is my friend, Freddie. The story of the Kigali Genocide Memorial started with him. Today is Freddie's day. April 14th is the day Freddie lost his entire family. And the stories are really personal. When you work with these people, this is not about working in a corporate world where this is my legacy project because I'm going to retire soon and it's great I put the system in place. Nope. This is legacy. This is about Freddie. This is about Eve. This is about Nelson and many others that we work with on a regular basis. So I'm proud to be able to share this story with you today because this is Freddie's day, and Freddie, as a friend of mine, I'm proud to say that we've continued to partner and work through his problems, Rwanda's problems. They're not solved. They don't get solved in a day. But I feel like that we're making progress, and finding new ways to work together is really probably the most exciting and rewarding type of work I've ever done in my career. So with that, I just wanted to say Dziękuję and thank you. Or in Rwanda, you could say Murakoze.
Jason, so moved and humbled by everything that you shared with us today. Thank you. I'm sure, like many of us in this room, I really want to get involved and do more. I'm curious about how you fund this and how you manage to get it moving in a world where we all need to keep working and pay the bills.
Yeah. So UX for Good is a nonprofit we established several years ago. Every challenge we take on like this is funded. In particular, when we went to Rwanda and took a team of 10, we did a Kickstarter campaign, and we funded it that way. In addition, designers pay their own way to get there, and we take care of all the rest. I think it's important to have a little skin in the game, so to speak. And then we do workshops and events, sort of like what we did here this week. In addition, one of the biggest challenges we had was with extending the work after the challenge. And so I started a new design agency, so to speak, to be able to carry a lot of that work forward. And so it's kind of a design collaborative, people pitching in. And so we have clients, and we work with nonprofits and the Kigali Genocide Memorial. And so some of it's funded by some of the international grants and funding that they do as well too. It's a variety of sources. I think that's we've designed the organizations in a way to be focused on the values and impact more than anything else.
That's impressive, isn't it? Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you once again. Thank you very much, Jason.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.